Serious, what is the saddest thing you've heard someone say? One night about 10:30 p.m. I was going into a local convenience store and saw a child riding his bike barefoot in 40-degree weather. On my way back out of the store he was still nearby, so I approached him, asking about where his parents are. He told me his dad kicked him out and he was trying to get to his mom's in a neighboring town. I called the local PD. Small town, so I knew both responding officers. Turns out he was only 6. Still breaks my heart thinking about it. At least you made a difference and probably saved the kid from a lot of trouble. Years ago my mother kept saying, your father is too sick, what if I die? Who's going to be with you? She passed away, and then after 1 year my father passed away too. I'm so sorry for your loss. I hope you're doing better now. Best of wishes. First thing that comes to mind was one time my grandpa was dealing with dementia. My mom and I had stopped by to visit him and he thought we were homeless strangers. He said that there were spare beds and food for us if we needed them. I didn't understand what he was saying until my mom explained it to me. He died in 2018, and I never got to truly say goodbye to him. I still miss him. He sounds like a wonderful man, someone who would be willing to take in strangers who needed help. I kinda wish you would have died instead of your brother. Context: when I was 23 my 21-year-old brother died. My mom and my brother had a very toxic relationship, whereas her and I had a decent. And she said this because if I would have died she wouldn't have felt as much guilt at as much of a failure because her and I were good. But with my brother there was just so much regret and things left unhealed. I was at my grandfather's funeral with my family. Never having seen my dad cry, he turns to me in tears and says, I had the greatest man in the world as a father, and you guys got screwed. This was the saddest one I've read so far. My grandpa had a stroke about 10 years ago and was bedbound for 2-3 years after at home. My grandma was just starting to suffer from dementia. We got a call one Sunday morning that grandpa died. The whole family started to head over to their house. The funeral director came to take his body and asked us to all go into another room while they took him out. During this, grandma seemed to only partially understand what was happening. The funeral director let us know they would be wheeling him out shortly and would have to pass the room we were in on their way outside. Everyone was quiet as they wheeled the stretcher to the door. When grandma said bye Frank, that just freaking killed me. I've never told anyone this before. My grandfather loved watermelon and my mother loved watermelon, and she said watermelon will always makes her happy. When my grandfather was on his deathbed all he talked about was how my mom, his adopted daughter, his favorite child, was growing watermelons in the backyard. The watermelon plant was just barely beginning to form fruit when my grandfather had to be taken to the hospital for a long-term stay. Every day he would talk about how he needed to get home in time for the watermelon to be ripe. He was a feisty old man and at some point tried to escape the hospital. He cut holes in the hospital pillow covers and wore it like a tunic and got so far as the street before staff realized he was missing. They brought him back and my mother told me that he was sobbing and that he just wanted to go home and eat watermelon. He passed away about a week later. My mother was distraught and she stopped tending to her garden and the watermelon never ripened. It's been 6 years since and my mother still won't grow watermelon because watermelon doesn't make me happy anymore. If you guys wanted to hear something else sad but also kind of sweet but mostly sad, he was going through dementia pretty bad in the hospital and my sister was 9 at the time. A few days before his death he stopped recognizing my mother, but he would call my little sister by my mother's name. In the end he remembered my mom as his little girl. I forget exactly where it was or what I was doing, but I had just given my wife a hug in a public place. Then she left to go do something. I settled down on my phone, but I guess I was smiling a lot and this kid asked me why I was smiling so much about a hug. I told him it was because it just made me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. He asked what I meant by that, and so after I thought for a second I told him it was like the feeling he got when his mom and dad told him they loved him. He sat there for a moment before responding, I don't really know what that's like. They never say that. He didn't look sad either, just said it like you might say anything you observe at a given point in time. Broke my heart. Sad kids who don't know they're sad are the saddest. When children go missing we mark them as runaways and post their cases. Reply from a social worker I received as a surviving adult of child trafficking from foster care. That's fricked up. From someone dropping off a prescription for a children's EpiPen. Yet, he had an anaphylactic reaction to his chemo. That poor kid. My dad, now in his 70s, said to me a few years ago that, when you're younger, people see you when they're walking past you. You might briefly make eye contact, they'll notice your presence. But when you're older, nobody sees you anymore. It really broke my heart to hear him say that. Obviously he's one of the most important people in the world to me, and to think that he feels unseen just makes me feel so sad. Then show him you see him. Go take him for a day out to do whatever he wants to do. Fishing, movie, etc. If you ever want to see your mom again, you better not leave the organization. Backstory: my mom had just died of cancer. The organization she spoke of was Jehovah's Witnesses, the religion my mom's was and I was at the time. The condition for seeing my mom again was that I would never question them. I don't know what to say to this. I'm hoping that, from the tense you used, you got the frick out of that one. I asked a student what happened to the new clothes a couple of faculty had pooled together to buy him because he showed up in the same shabby t-shirt again. Mom sold them. Frick, me. I'm waking up with really swollen eyes tomorrow. Back in that time when I was in Greece I saw this beautiful little child who both of her parents died in Syria. She was sleeping on the field in the middle of nowhere. It turns out she was trying to cross the borders to Germany, and she came with relatives but lost her way. I managed to get her some warm soup and a camping tent, while me and my team in Germany used to drive with tea to serve them. We also managed to find her relatives after looking for them for straight 8 hours from camp to camp. God, till this day I can't forget how sad and heartbroken she was. I hope she is well today. Thank you for helping a child in need. When my dad was dying, we found out he only had a couple days left. I was there when he called his friend. He whispered, "Hey Willie, I'm dying." I don't remember anything but that. My grandma, after my uncle, her youngest, passed away in his 40s after a short illness. I'm not sure. I think I'm confused. But, did Mark die? Dementia is a freaking bastard. My wife and I were foster parents. We went to an event with our foster child at the local Museum of Science and Industry for foster kids. The museum had a rope obstacle course that is way up in the air. Kids at the event were not allowed to do it because they are in state care and there are limitations in what activities are deemed dangerous. For instance, our child could not be in a trampoline or ride in a motorcycle. The cutest little girl, maybe 6 years old, told my wife, "I hope someday somebody wants me and I can go up there." I cried just typing this. Freaking kills me. This right here is why I want to foster and or adopt children. No child should ever feel like they're unwanted or unloved. I was 7, 1/2 months pregnant with my daughter. I had to go to a doctor's appointment alone. My doctor looked at me and said, "I have bad news. Your daughter has a fatal heart condition and she is going to die." 3 weeks later, I gave birth to my beautiful stillborn daughter. I am so sorry. A long time ago I was hanging out in my room when my roommate came home from work. It was silent for a while. He didn't turn on his computer, his switch. He was just sitting in his computer chair. Then I hear him whisper to himself, "I miss you, Dad," and he starts sobbing. I found out that morning was when his dad passed away from a brain tumor. It was indeed a sad day for many. This still guts me. Ever since I read this when you posted it, it sticks with me because I dread the day I lose either of my parents, especially my dad. I'm sorry for your friend's loss. I will never in my life forget the sound of my sister's voice when she called to say her kid died. We all knew it was coming. She was born like 12 weeks early, had a brain bleed, a bunch of other issues. Doctors already told them if she survived she would have severe mental and physical disabilities, etc. But the sheer heartbreak in her voice. I can't imagine anything worse than losing a child. I hope your sister is doing okay. I worked with a man who lost his entire family in a house fire. He told me he could hear them screaming but couldn't reach them. Jesus, that's a giant seed for survivor guilt. I hope that guy got some help. I can't even imagine that kind of trauma. I used to work at a school, and there was one kid who we all suspected strongly that she was being neglected by her mom. This kid would show up dirty and disheveled, constantly had lice, and was overall not well cared for. On her birthday, her mom was supposed to visit her at school. The whole day before the mom came, this kid was excited as frick to see her mom basically acknowledge her birthday. Just as we got word that her mom had come, the kid says excitedly, "I hope my mom gives me a kiss." I had to step out after hearing that. This is one of the saddest for some reason. In a casino in Mississippi, I once heard a woman praying to a giant Elvis statue because she was broke and desperately needed money. When me bro died and we went to see him in the funeral directors, the way my dad patted his shoulder and said, "Right, I'm going now," the same way he would say it after we had visited to have dinner or something. But there was just a finality to it which made me realize we'd never see him again. It crushed me. "Mommies don't love us, only babysitters do," said by my 4-year-old nephew about my sil to his babysitter. There are two that stick out to me along my life journey. 1. I have a close friend. We've been friends for 30+ years. He had a tough upbringing. His dad passed suddenly when my friend was 5. He grew up pretty much in poverty. His mother had a lot of untreated mental health issues. She loved her kids and did her best, but it really wasn't enough. He continues to fight his own demons to this day. One day, we were talking about our upbringings. Mine was pretty much the polar opposite of his in every possible way. During the conversation, he just looked at me and said, "Well, the difference between your upbringing and mine is that your parents were invested in you. My mother wasn't invested in me." It just kind of hit it all home for me in a way that really made me sad. He was just born into a really bad situation and had to make the best of it. Life is very, very unfair. 2. A friend of mine was expecting her first child. Some of the early genetic testing came back as questionable and she was getting some further testing. My friend also has a heart condition that made her pregnancy high risk. If the baby ended up dying in utero, it could have some very serious complications for her. So if the genetic testing came back with a genetic anomaly, her doctors were highly recommending terminating the pregnancy. This went against everything she believed in, but she was also very cognizant of the fact she would be risking her own life by not getting the abortion. She was really having a crisis of conscience. Eventually, the second round of genetic testing came back and it showed, with 99% certainty, that her son had a trisomy that was incompatible with life. Babies born with this trisomy are either stillborn or live for just a few hours to a few days after birth. Her doctors said she had a week to decide on terminating the pregnancy. If she waited much longer, it would be very difficult for her to legally get an abortion in her state. The decision was torturing her and she really didn't know what to do. Her husband and her family were pushing her to terminate. She just couldn't bring herself to do it. She wanted to leave it in God's hands instead. We talked to each other a lot over the next few days. About 4 days after she found this out, there was message on my voicemail at work and all it said was, "Looks like God made the decision for me." I knew she had miscarried and her voice just sounded like she was completely and totally gutted. The whole thing was beyond heartbreaking. A long time ago when I worked in a nursing home, I overheard the husband of a resident softly crying and trying to explain that his wife needed to sign the divorce papers he brought in because otherwise he couldn't afford to pay for her care in the home. It was a shared room and I was doing some kind of care activity with the roommate. She had a traumatic brain injury and needed 24/7 care, but they were under 65. Couldn't get Medicare yet, and he made too much for her to be on Medicaid. One of their kids kinda filled me in when I just made a generic "is everything okay" comment to them when I left the room and saw them in the hall. His insurance was crappy and didn't have long-term care apparently, so to keep her there where she would be safe he needed to legally divorce her so she could get signed up for Medicaid. She didn't and couldn't understand. I think eventually they had to go through the courts, find her incompetent and do it that way. He still visited every day. It was just so painful that he had to do that. Frick the American healthcare system. Frick it. We were helping mind 2 children of someone who a relative used to mind every so often from across the road. After an hour here or there over the course of a week, they come up to us and asked if they could come stay with my partner and I, as we would play with them and no one plays with them at home. They were generally known as naughty kids but were brilliant with us. It was a gut-wrenching feeling having 2 young children look at you with hope and not really being in a situation to help. I've been in this situation too. It is gut-wrenching. I still think of those kids regularly, and this was 20 years ago. When my aunt was alive, she suffered from dementia. At a family wedding, my cousin Eric went up to her and struck up a little conversation. After he walked away, I heard her say to my other aunt, "Who was that young man that kept calling me grandma?" My parents both never left our home region more than 30 miles away from their hometown, and I was born and raised in that same area. Neither pursued higher ed, and all of my siblings did. Lots of loaned scholarships, debt, and grants, but we did it and are all more familiar with the world outside our lovely cozy hometown. But my parents always provided. My dad, especially, was always very thoughtful at like yard sales and Goodwills. Would build us nice computers out of spare parts he'd find from donated broken trashed machines, among other small but thoughtful and intentional gestures. The night before I left to go to uni in a big city hundreds of miles away from home, my mom was tired and went to bed, and my dad and I ended up getting drunk. At some point we are having a heart-to-heart and end up sitting on the road in front of my house looking at the beautiful star-filled rural night sky of our home. He turns to me with tears in his eyes and says, choking back tears, "I may not have a big and expansive life, and sometimes I regret that I couldn't do more for you all growing up." Instantly had tears of my own. My dad is a fantastic father, and not only provided dutifully with mom, but was always looking to exploit his knowledge and resources to do something special for us just to make us and mom happy. It broke my damned heart that he was looking at where I was headed versus where his life was at, and felt like he didn't do well to prepare me for a bigger, better life. That he thought he wasn't the best father he could be to us, because he always was and still is. I was able to navigate completely foreign and unmet life challenges in a totally new and foreign environment because I knew I had a solid system of upbringing and support. Without a doubt. Your dad reminds me of a line from a country song. That's the life you can hang your hat on. He sounds like an amazing, solid man. My grandpa talking about his older siblings. At the time, his older sister had cancer and didn't have much time left. His brother is getting up there in age and is starting to forget things, and was put into old folks home. Just the tremor in his voice and him trying to hold back tears was so sad. I haven't seen him like that since my dad, his oldest son, passed 15 years ago. My grandpa blaming himself for the death of my grandmother. "If only I would have woken up sooner, she would still be alive." I was at the funeral of my husband's work buddy, and he was an eccentric guy. Not everyone's cup of tea, but my husband and I got along with him. He was in his earlier 50s, battled multiple types of cancer for 6+ years. He'd had a brain tumor removed 6 months before he passed. He was the baby of his family. His father has Alzheimer's. Through the social gathering before the funeral and during the service, his father didn't say anything. It seemed like he didn't really know what was going on. When the casket was wheeled out, the family walked behind with dad right behind the casket. As the pallbearers loaded the casket into the hearse, his father called out, "But I'm not ready." You could hear the heartbreak in his father's voice. Everyone was crying. I will never forget that moment. My younger cousin suffers from autism. He was bullied horrendously in public school. He would come home completely in tears. One day he was refusing to eat and just said in a quiet whimper, "I wish I wasn't broken." Walked by a mom and a boy who was crying. I was walking longer ahead when I heard the mom say, "You're a 10-year-old boy. Stop crying like an autistic." I'm autistic myself and that broke my heart. What the frick? When my mom told my grandma that her little brother died, my grandma said, "I guess I'm the only one left in the family." That's fricked up. I remember seeing an interview with a model who said that she liked going to cat cafes because it made her not want to kill herself. This really got me. Only being appreciated for your beauty while simultaneously never being beautiful enough is freaking depressing. Most models struggle a lot, I think. My uncle was in the advanced stages of brain cancer and his short-term memory went quick, which began to extend to more and more distant memories as time went by. His wife of 20 years had been taking very good care of him and was always by his side through it all. She was a nurse by trade too, so that helped. One day we were over at their house and I heard him say, as his wife was trying to dress him and he was struggling, "Who are you? Where's Samantha?" His first wife who he divorced 24 years prior. "I want Samantha, go get her." Ouch. The way my cat swirled around my leg after I gave him a treat and let out a small meow and went outside only for me to find him dead the very next day. I just found out my cat got hit by a car a couple hours ago. This hit hard. My first pregnancy, we got to the point where the baby could hear us, so my husband would read bedtime stories to me, the baby, hoping she'd know him right away when she was born. She ended up being stillborn at 4 months. A few days after it happened, we were out with a friend and I saw him just suddenly start sobbing. I took him aside and he told me, "I just had a dark thought. Do you think she ever heard me reading? Or, she was probably. Dang, this one is sinister." Got into it with a really rough kid at school. Shoulder known. He was always dirty. Clothes and hair and skin had grime on them. Knew his father wasn't around. My parents forced me to write him a letter apologizing. I mean, he started it, but whatever. Writing the address, "What is this place? I've never met anybody from there." My mother tells me, "That's because nobody is from there. The only thing there is warehouses and fisheries." It must be his mother's work address. It's an industrial area. He's homeless. I have a niece, Banana, who has a out there older sister who does a lot of crazy stuff and always plays the victim in the situation. For example, my mom complimented her hair and she shaved it all off because she wanted to start all over so the length would be even. She had one side already shaved, and then about a week later, her mother told her she had to find a job, so she punched her. When she threw her out, she called us crying and said her mother was overreacting because she meant to punch the chair, not her. This is some of the tame things she's done. Well, Banana's turning 15 and wants to get a piercing. She was trying to decide between a nose or belly button piercing and, with my mom's permission, is getting a nose piercing. A little stud. Well, she told my grandmother on the phone, who said, "That's a little bit like something your sister would do." Huh. Banana is scared of being like her sister because of all the horrible stuff she has done. The next day, my grandmother called and said she wanted to talk to Banana. She was on speaker and said, "Hun, I've been really feeling bad about saying that you were like your sister and I want to apologize. You're not like her. You're nothing like her." Grandma sounds like she's tearing up. Banana actually does start crying. My mom gives me a pout like she wants to cry, and I'm thinking about crying. I didn't realize how much being compared to her sister actually affected Banana until that moment. That would be my nephew admitting he knew information that would have saved his grandfather from going to jail for 7 years on false charges, but didn't want to miss out on free drugs and alcohol. For a project in college, I spent a lot of time interviewing homeless people around town. One woman was a homemaker who became an alcoholic and a drug addict. She was sent to a rehab facility in my college town, failed out and was disowned by her family. She said she sees her daughter walking around campus sometimes, but her daughter refuses to acknowledge her. I was the most hair-breaking story I have ever heard. When my grandpa was in the hospital and losing the fight against the cancer, he once said, "I want to go home to my brother now." His brother had died about 2 weeks earlier. Grandpa passed away about 2 days after he had said this. Grandpa knew his brother had died. I was a substitute teacher and I was on recess duty and I found a 3rd grade boy sitting by a tree, crying. I asked him what was wrong and he told me he didn't want to live anymore. Oh God. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.